And here we are, Ryan McKinny. Ryan, I'm in Paris. I had to start a fire because it's cold here, and we're
Yeah.
actually confined because of COVID. There is actually a curfew in Paris at 9 o'clock every day. And where are you? I see some light behind you.
Yeah, I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, which is still fairly warm. We haven't quite hit real fall yet. Well, we have the leaves are turning and everything, and it's beautiful, but it's not. I don't need a fire just yet.
You don't need a fire to sit.
Yeah.
Were you born in North Carolina?
No, actually, I was born in the Los Angeles area in California, but I have family in North Carolina, and so and I love it here in the mountains. It's really beautiful, especially when you're, flying all over the universe and doing lots of things. It's nice to have a place to come back to that's a little bit more relaxed.
Right, and you can still work in the West Coast, but then the jet lag is not too big when you go to Europe.
Exactly, yeah.
That's
And it's a quick 45-minute flight to New York City, so it's a pretty convenient place to be.
Okay, so you were born in California. You were in Juilliard at one point, but
Yeah.
when did you start singing? What was your first connection with music and singing?
Both my parents were classical guitarists when they were in college, and so we kind of had classical music in our house. And my grandmother was really into musical theater, so I saw things like Phantom of the Opera when I was a kid, and Les Mis and things like that. But then, I went to community college. I went to Pasadena Community College in California, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I sort of wanted to be in music in some way, and I had sung in a lot of choirs and things. But then I have found a voice teacher who was like, you might want to try singing. It seems like something you could be good at. And I didn't know anything about opera, so I went and I checked out from the library all these recordings. And I just fell in love with it right away. Just the way that a human voice can express so much.
What was your age then?
I was probably 19 at that point.
Okay, so you already had a male voice. And what kind of voices were you attracted to when you listened to them?
I written the dramatic baritones. So I don't know if I ended up being that because I was interested in it, or it's the other way around, but I sort of fell in love with George London, and Leonard Warren I couldn't get enough Leonard Warren when I was first learning about it. Because just the sound of that, I couldn't believe a human could do that, and it conveyed so much emotion,
But it could have been a dramatic tenor. It could have been, a basso profondo. So you were toward already that huge resonance, dark, masculine, and kind of not the young hero voice, like the real man in control, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it was probably I was hoping that's that kind of thing I could sing. I don't know at that point. I mean, I think I sort of loved all of the standard stuff everybody loves, right? I Verdi and I guess Wagner isn't that standard for people to love, but I fell in love with Wagner right away. And Mozart and things like that. But something about that.
So you went to a voice teacher, and what did you discover? I mean, at one point you have to, when you're 19, I mean, nobody can tell you if your voice is going to go in that direction or not.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, there was no way to know. And I don't think my teachers knew, and I don't think I knew, but I was certainly attracted to that kind of music. But, it was mostly this seems like a thing that I could be good at, and that I enjoyed. I had been in some plays and things like that. And so I enjoyed the theater part of it too. And yeah, it's just sort of evolved from there. I got more serious about it pretty quickly. And then I transferred to the Juilliard School in New York, moved to New York. That's kind of when stuff got, more serious, obviously. And
approximately which years did you enter Juilliard?
I want to say I started there in 2001, 2002. And I was there for, I think, 4 years overall.
Okay. So yeah, Eric Agastani was already gone from a long time, and it was that team. Diana Richardson, you probably worked with.
Yeah, I worked with. She's fantastic. Yeah,
Diana from my Spoleto time, and Brian Ziegler was already there.
Yeah.
And nice years, I'm sure. But then how do you go from Juilliard to having a career?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it was a little bit of a standard, like I auditioned for all the young artist programs. But I do think in my case, like it wasn't obvious that I was going to have a big career to people at the time. It kind of took me a little longer to figure out, technically what I was doing and which repertoire was correct and all that stuff. So I auditioned for all the young art. Well, I don't know a lot of the young artist programs, and I ended up getting into the Houston Grand Opera Studio, which at the time I was sort of skeptical. Like, I had spent a week in Houston for the competition. I was like, Houston, who wants to be in Houston? Like, what a terrible place. But actually, I of course fell in love with it, and the people there are amazing. And actually, the city's really wonderful.
It's a great studio. It's a good studio.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's a great program. Wonderful people, and of course now I've sung there many, many times as a guest artist, and it's what I think of as my home company, and I love it there. So it was for sure good luck to end up there.
Right. So so now, in terms of what the German call FAR, which is voice characterization, voice family, you consider yourself as a dramatic baritone, a bass baritone, a baritone bass, a bass with top.
I used to worry about that more. And nowadays, I think the Fach thing is like helpful for people that are casting, right? Like,
yeah. No, yeah, and there is, like, sorry to interrupt you, that there is, in the orchestra work, there is a book called The Daniels, in which you have by composer all their works, and then you can search by orchestration. And in the end, you can see that the program has been done by that book. There is also a book, the Cobble, I don't know what the German call it, which is used by every opera company, where you can see by voice type what are the roles, including mistakes sometimes. And everybody's casting, and you need to be part of that group, which in a way is lacking imagination. And sometimes there are voices that can do things that no other voice can do, but you cannot put them in a category.
Yeah, I found that really to be frustrating when I was a younger singer, because I don't really obviously fit into one category. I mean, I sing Wagner, but I wouldn't call myself really a Wagner singer.
Fortas, I saw that you sing on Fortas, Fliegende Holländer.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you can do also Tannhauser, some of it,
Yeah.
So,
and
Fortas is a high baritone with Helden qualities, but very, very high. Fliegende Holländer is, you need to have a darker voice. So where do you fit there again?
I mean, I think I'm probably more in a Hollander mold, but I mean, to me, that's not really for me to decide. You know what I mean? Like, if I feel like I have something to give to a role, that I have something to say with it, then I decide to do it. If I think I can physically do it, and there's something for me to express with it, then I take it on. But I don't get stuck too much. I used to spend a lot of time thinking, well, could I be great in this role compared to these other singers? And like, is this really me? And I tend to let go of that now.
Right. And I think this is great, because there are some roles, actually, you can color them very differently vocally. And as long as you have the fundamental requirement, which is you can sing the notes. I mean, of course, you're not going to sing the Queen of the Night. And you can, you have enough energy in the voice to go over the orchestra in a certain register.
Yeah.
Who cares about darker?
I think of somebody like Thomas Stewart is a good example of kind of saying everything, and was well known for Wagner, but sang tons of Verdi and other things too. And that's sort of, if I had to compare myself to somebody, another American singer, probably somebody like him, that, he did a lot with text and musical choices. And I'm always interested in the storytelling part of it. So I don't get too hung up on pure sound, because I can't do anything about that. This is my voice. So
right. So if you do Don Giovanni, you could sing Leporello and Don Giovanni.
Yeah.
but you have sung Don Giovanni, Don Giovanni. Is it a choice? So you're more of a womanizer than
I
a
mean, actually,
right?
I've sung Leporello too, and I've had plans to sing Leporello, and then it didn't turn out for just technical like scheduling reasons. So it's definitely both, and I enjoy both. I think Giovanni is more challenging in some ways in terms of he can be sort of two-dimensional, and
Right,
it's vocally actually a lot of different voices in one.
right,
I think the difference between something like Fin Candavino and then the Serenade is
right.
huge in term
No, yeah,
and so I enjoy the challenge of that. I think Leporello is just really fun. It's not vocally so stressful. But yeah, I like both of them. I would sing both. I mean, and to me, I'm starting to get to the point in my career, in my life, where what's interesting to me is the people that I'm working with and the particular production and the conductor and the colleagues. And that's more what I'm drawn to than like, I really want to sing this role or I really want to sing that role. I would rather sing a small role in a production that I think is amazing, that says something incredible, than, the leading role in another Vida Aufnahme where you just jump on stage and do it, and that's all it is. That's just
right,
kind of not my thing.
right. Um, that I really connect to what you say about this, and actually it says a lot about your artistry, and that's why actually you can jump into very various roles and making them your roles. To just stay a little more on this voice characterization, the fact you sing Escamillo a lot, right?
Yeah, I did for a
And
while. Yeah.
Escamillo is impossible to classify. And actually, nobody can sing Escamillo well because,
Yeah.
I mean, you are going to fail here or there if it's not in the kind of pants you need to wear too. So, do you like to sing Escamillo? I've found very few people who like to sing Escamillo. They just do it because they are asked to do it, and it's actually, prestigious.
Yeah, I have to say I like singing it.
Right?
It's hard to sing.
It
It's
is.
what I find frustrating about the process of singing Escamillo is like it's one of the most famous things ever in opera,
Right.
and people are never satisfied with whatever you do. Everybody has their favorite, and they say, "Oh, you're not as good as so and so,"
Van
or
Damme,
whatever.
yeah, not
And
Van Damme.
I just have no time for that anymore. It's like,
Right.
so I mean, I would do it again, and especially in an interesting production or something. But yeah, it's one of those things that you talk to people that sang it a lot, and they sort of say, "Well, that paid for my house," and then I moved on with my life.
Right. Okay. So you are obviously very interested in working with colleagues. You like to work on projects, but it seems to have a very important dramatic and theatrical component. How do you work your roles? Do you start by learning the music? Do you conceptualize about the character? What's your process there?
Yeah, I like to listen. This is controversial, but I like to listen to a lot of recordings, not just of the part of my role, but just in general to kind of, especially if it's a composer that I don't sing a lot of. If it's Wagner or if it's a new Wagner role or a new Verdi role or something, I understand that language well enough now at this point that I know what Wagner's trying to say in this moment or what Verdi's trying to say in that moment. But especially with something new, I like to just sort of let it kind of seep into me and to sort of get the language. And then I spend a lot of time with the text usually.
Mhm.
Um, and and then just singing it. And I find a lot of like my process of learning physically how to sing it takes care of a lot of like the memorization and things. And I tend to start to try out different acting choices as while I'm practicing the singing part, because I really feel like it's more interesting to me. I was going to say it's a mistake, but everybody has their own way of doing it. But for me, I really would rather combine acting and singing into one thing. The way that I'm expressing myself as a singer is who the character is. They're not separate. I think some singers think of it as like, I sing in this beautiful way and then I act, I stand on stage here and I make this emotion, and those two things are kind of separate.
Mhm.
To me, the most amazing people I see on stage are the ones that really can marry those two things, that they're not separate activities.
Absolutely, absolutely. But you have to build an interpretation, but at the same time, you say you like to work with your colleagues, and that includes the stage director. So
Yeah,
you need to be ready also to be flexible. If
absolutely.
he says, actually, Escamillo is a very insecure, neurotic person,
Yep.
and the whole aria is defensive, and
Yeah.
you are able to do that.
Yeah, so my theory about that is that I come with as many choices as possible. I
Uh-huh.
don't get stuck in one, and this is true musically or dramatically. I think it's an amateur actor thing to say, well, this is what I see as this character, and that's what my choice is.
Right.
Any good actor can play 1,000 different things in any moment, and coming with something that makes sense to you is a good starting point. But of course, the director and the conductor and your colleagues on stage all hopefully do affect how you interpret that role. And I also, I also like, if I can, to talk to directors and conductors ahead of time, have a quick, I've started doing this the last few years, if I can, a quick phone call and just say, hey, what are you thinking about this? And what's your vision for it, to start as I'm working on the piece, to really kind of find where my interpretation might overlap with theirs and where it doesn't, and to find ways around that. I really like the collaborative process. I enjoy rehearsing.
Right. Well, it was so do I, and for me, I cannot separate the dramatic aspect from the musical aspect. And actually, the
Yeah,
best production, I think, is when you have obviously a good conductor, but who loves drama, and a good stage director who loves music.
yeah,
And they don't need to have the same opinion, as long as they understand the language of the other one, and they can start, dialectically have a conversation about it, and that's going to make something interesting. Can I ask you? You worked all over Europe. You work in the States a lot. What are the situations that you like the most, and what have been maybe the production you like the most to, or the directors you like the most to work with?
yeah. Actually, the just popped into my head as you were saying that is sometimes there are, teams of people that get along really well. And one of my first really like memorable experiences, that has stuck with me over the years, was with Peter Sellers and Esa-Pekka Salonen. We did Oedipus Rex, and I sang all of the, there's like 3
Yeah.
baritone roles. I did all of them. And just the combination of their 2 visions, which were separate in some ways, but they communicate really well. And that, kind of collaborative thing but it also, something I love about Peter, and I've worked with him a lot now, he's the kind of guy that, people will complain sometimes, well, that's totally off the wall, and like he totally missed with this thing or whatever. But what I appreciate is that he's always trying to, stop
We're
my,
losing, I think it's you, Brian. We're losing your
yeah,
image.
1 second.
Oh,
Yikes.
no, there's plenty of light. Beautiful.
Yeah, I think it was my camera decided to turn off.
Decided to
That's what I get for using a nicer camera for this instead of just the
a good
webcam.
camera.
So anyway, what I love about Peter is that he really commits to saying something with each piece, and he
Right.
tries to make it amazing every time. And sometimes he falls short, but that's not the point. And to me, I'm always more interested in somebody, Christophe Loy is another director who I love working with for the same reason, that he never half-asses, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, too late. He never goes halfway and just says, oh, that's good enough.
There's a point of view, and there is a reason for the point of view.
Exactly.
And that point of view might seem sometimes far from the piece, but there is always a connection to the piece. Maybe if it's opposing or working against the literary of the piece, there is a very strong point of view with the piece. And I mean, the directors I like to work the most with were usually that kind of directors. I think of someone who is not working much anymore, Günther Kramer, who people love to hate, but or Ruth Berghaus, I mean, that was insane, but so smart, and with a knowledge of the score that is unbelievable, even if it's going in a totally different direction.
Yeah, that's a huge thing, right? That with directors, I think I'm all for wild ideas. What can be frustrating is wild ideas combined with no sense of what the music is.
Right.
That happens sometimes. Yeah.
Tested on the story itself and tested on the music.
Yeah.
And the music is going to resist, and that resistance is interesting.
Yeah.
As long as the director listens to that resistance and counteracts and work in it. If he ignores it totally, then it doesn't work. May I ask you, no, I don't want names. Have you been in a situation where you didn't get along with directors or colleagues?
I'm usually pretty good.
I ask everybody, and I get a very different response every time.
I have to say that usually I can find my way around a director. I tend to, there's directors I certainly would prefer not to work with, but there's nobody who I've had like big fights with. There have been some conductors, on the other hand, who I have not gotten along with. Not many, but.
Okay, and what would be the reason in that case?
Usually it's when I feel like, it's sort of the opposite of what we're just talking about with directors. It's
right.
There are some conductors who think of music as something in a vacuum, and they don't respond to what's happening in the production and what the character is going through, and want to be in control of some things in the dramatic reading of it that without collaborating on that. And I am, of course, I really am always interested in everybody in the room's opinion about how to make this thing come together, whatever it is. And I want to hear conductors' opinions about dramatic things. What can be frustrating is when someone comes in and they haven't been in rehearsal, and it's sometimes famous people, and they say, oh, well, we do it this way. This is how you sing this, and this is how you sing that, and they haven't been there to see that maybe there's another reason that we did it this way. But for the most part, I think most people who know me would say that I get along with people pretty well. So
that's the reputation you have. Everybody was said, I talked to, said, oh, I'm going to have Ryan on our little conversations. Said, you have to ask him about this bird project movie. And I tried to research it a little, and I said, well, I'm going to ask Ryan, what is this about? Can you tell us about the bird movie project?
I'll give you a little backstory, which is that when the pandemic hit, my father was a director of photography, and I grew up on movie sets. And so I kind of have always had some interest in film. I actually tried to make some like opera film things happen years ago that didn't quite come together. But so when the pandemic hit, I started making all these videos to try to raise money for AGMA Relief Fund and Artist Relief Tree, and they were fun and involved a bunch of singers. And then we got into more.
You produced the video yourself?
Yeah, I'm talking about earlier on in like March, April, May. And those were all on cell phones, and I would edit them together, and we did all kinds of crazy things, which were fun. And then I got more into real, what I would call filmmaking with real equipment, and have done several projects since then. The biggest one, which just came out this last weekend, is called Vinkensport, which is this one-act opera by David T. Little and Royce Vavrick. And I co-directed it with E. Lauren Meeker, who is the general director of Opera San Antonio. Her and I are friends from way back, but most recently we worked on Don Giovanni together. She directed Don Giovanni at Washington National Opera with me. So she called me one day in May and was like, I've seen you've done these movie sort of short film things with opera. What do you think about making making a film of this opera, Vinkensport? And I was like, what the heck is that? I've never heard of it. So Vinkensport, the thing is a sport, a Flemish sport, where a bunch of people get together outside. They sit 6 to 8 feet apart, and they all have a box with a bird in it, with a finch. And in an hour, whoever's bird tweets the most times wins. So it's this kind of weird, like, niche sport. And they created, David and Royce created this opera where basically it follows these 6 very weird people. And it's funny and heartfelt, and it feels a little bit like a Christopher Guest mockumentary, like Best in Show or Waiting for Guffman.
Right.
Anyway, so we made what is really more like a movie than like an opera, like a captured opera. You can watch it on Marquee TV right now for free. We had a whole film crew. We shot everybody separately. They recorded the orchestra first. Tim Myers, who's fantastic, was the conductor, and he recorded the orchestra and then was there with us on set. We were listening to the orchestra recording in our ear while we sang. And then all of it got edited together later into what really feels like a film. And I'm super happy with how it turned out. It's,
so you respected the score, and are there scenes where you just talk and it's like a conversational movie, or it's all music?
It's all music. And the way it works is, the way the libretto works is these characters are talking, but it has the feeling like they're in an interview. So we set it up as if they were like you see a documentary interview, right? And so each monologue, we made it as if they were talking to an interviewer in, like, there's a documentary crew at the Vinkensport competition. Right. And so what you watch is them giving this information, telling their story, but then there's B-roll scenes that we cut to while they're singing that show more of their life in ways that are both funny and sometimes touching. And it turned out to be something that's really works as a movie.
So this brings the question of the connection between movie, film, and opera, and with all, the Don Giovanni was an extraordinary, but also I remember the Parsifal of Silverberg, where he was using possibilities in the movies that you could not have on stage, like you have, exactly, a boyish or a girl, and then it's the voice of a man, and so on. The pandemic somehow forced us to explore some of this connection between opera and music. I am dreaming of a connection where an opera would be written for a film situation, or even a 3D situation, maybe. Yeah. And there is, I've talked briefly about this with some of your colleagues, but there is this, if you follow me for a second, this connection between technology and opera has existed from the very beginning of opera. That means an act is the length of a candle in the Baroque time, because that's the only way you can lit the stage. Yeah. And you lit the stage with paintings, toile peinte, that are more favorable for mythology or abstract situation. And then when you have the possibility of having another way of lighting, you have a different type of sets, which condition a different type of stories, which in turn change the type of music you can present. Absolutely. Somehow, in the last 100 years, we have not changed much. And we have not used modern technology to inspire new way of writing operas, and in return, different music and different experiences. Do you have any opinion about this?
Yeah, I have very strong opinions about this. So we actually, my wife and I, she's co-directed some other things with me. We started a production company called Keep the Music Going Productions that was involved with Finkensport, but we also produced a film for Washington National Opera called Monuments of Hope, another one for the Glimmerglass Festival called Glimmerglass Leader, and we have another one coming up, which I won't announce yet, but we're working with Dallas and some other companies. There's lots of cool things in the hopper. And so I always say, especially Wagner's a good example. If Wagner had access to film, he would have made films. Like, he would have used everything he did use everything at his capacity to make Gesamtkunstwerk, right? Yeah. So I think that we've gotten a little stuck in this idea of what opera is. And one of the things we're working on actually is a new Kamala Sankaram opera, where we are conceiving of it as a film from the early parts of it. And so she knows that we're making a film of it and is thinking of it in that way, kind of like what you're describing. Because I think there's...
So what are the possibilities you think that you can have in a movie that you would not have on stage, for instance?
Yeah, Vinkensport's a great example. Like, we have entire scenes happening that we would have to imagine are happening in the character's head on stage.
Right.
They're thoughts of theirs that a good singer can help you feel, but you can't have a really direct...
Or you can have a visualization of it.
Yeah, exactly. And other things too, just in terms of sound, I think there's a way forward where there's interesting options of, different types of polyrhythms and stuff that in real time you couldn't do because they'd be too difficult, where you could, if it's recorded, there's different ways of, I just think the
Or even
possibilities
sense of space, actually,
exactly that
paradoxically.
too.
You could
Yeah,
get the impression that half of the orchestra is very far away, and you can
exactly.
understand that even if you have it coming
Well,
only from one screen.
yeah, and this, is a good example of we've had to with COVID, you can't get everybody together, right? So for Vinkensport, we filmed every single singer separately, even though there's ensembles, and then we put them all together at the end, and it feels like they're in one space. We did that too with Monuments of Hope. Janae and I were in that, and Janae Bridges is the star of that, and we sang all of this duet separately, but then put it together. And I think those are what are necessities for now because of COVID, but there's lots of possibilities that brings about too that will be really
Right.
interesting for
Yeah,
film, but also, as you say, 3D, but also even live performances that happen in different ways, like what they've
right.
done in Detroit with Yuval Sharon does this amazing, sort of more like art installation rather than like a traditional opera. And I think, there's so much that's difficult and horrible that's happened about, in this time of pandemic, but there's certainly things that are happening that are really inspiring too, that I think will help move our art form forward even after this period is over.
But don't you think the difficulty is going to be able to connect these things that we are reinventing or trying to reinvent through film, 3D, social media, internet, or projection on stage or installations on stage, and what people are looking for in traditional opera, which is a direct connection in the hall with a breathing actor who is taking a risk with his voice in the moment and might not succeed but succeed, and it's more exciting than anything else. And I'm trying to kind of connect the two. And I think the person who is going to be able to connect those two things is going to be the winner in our industry, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's trying to figure that out. And one of the things we've come up with is that we're filming some of these things in two ways. One way in which it's meant to be consumed on a screen, totally, where you watch the singer sing on camera, like Vin Vinkensport. And then another version where it's less narrative on screen, so you don't see them singing on screen, but a lot of the internal things still happen, so that you can have a live performance of the film,
Right.
with singers in front of it and orchestra in front of it, as they do with Harry Potter, and the orchestra plays the Harry Potter score, or Star
Right.
Trek, or whatever. And I think there's a whole mishmash of film and opera that could exist that really hasn't been explored that much right now. I also think it's similar to movies and live theater, right? Those two things still exist. When TV and movies came about, everyone said, oh, well, live theater is going to die. But I think they're just two different art forms, and that's fine. And we don't have a version of that for opera, but we could. There's no reason you couldn't have a whole entire genre of opera film that kind of work together with live opera. I don't think live opera is going anywhere. People love live singing. There's something
Yeah,
totally.
and there's nothing more modern and chicer than to have one bass baritone in your living room with a pianist and 40 people.
Yeah.
And people are very excited by this, especially because we are being saturated with digital and information, and all of a sudden that presence is very important. But I agree with you. There are also hybrid projects or cross-pollination of creation that are possible. What is missing is the new works that address those possibilities. That has not happened yet, and unfortunately, the people who are leading our industry, they are not understanding this from a commercial point of view. So they will never understand it from an artistic point of view either. Yeah. They just think the money is in the theater in a traditional way, and they cannot make that jump.
Yeah, I think one of the big sort of divides right now in companies is the people that are seeing the future possibilities of what we're building right now, and the people that see it as a stopgap, that we're just going to wait 6 months or 9 months or a year and then it'll be over. And I think particularly like Dallas, I mean, what you all have done with the TDO network is incredible. And I've said to, David and everybody there, like, I think what's the next step, and I think everybody knows this, is these sort of podcasts and things are awesome, and it's wonderful that like so many people watch them. There's room for growth in the actual art part of it, right?
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what we're focused on, and what we're working with,
Yeah.
people like
And
Dallas and everywhere else on. And I think that's the interesting next step that you'll start to see over the next few months. I think some things come out that are more in that category.
Absolutely, and we are, as you know very well, we are exploring that. I think it was very important to start with something that would relate with people, help us reach different audiences, and explore what's possible. But
and
we
I
are
think that's the
creative, really creative and unique aspect of things.
And it's not an either or thing, right? I don't think that there's anything. I think that the fact that particularly Dallas has found this audience for this type of content is incredible. And it shouldn't be that we're just only do that for now until we can do something better. That now is the thing that exists and should stay. Like it's an incredible way of engaging people with our process that's a little bit separate from the actual thing. And other industries have that, of course. Like there's tons of podcasts about why is it happening again?
You're too brilliant for the camera.
Yeah, my camera has decided that. Oh my gosh, look at that. Yeah. See, kids at home, this is what happens when you use a fancy camera to do Zoom calls. But yeah, I think, movies have podcasts. There's political podcasts. There's, podcasts and not just podcasts, but, YouTube series and things like that, I think that's something that's here to stay, and it's great. And we just, while we have this time, while we're not busy having to, produce live operas all the time, I think one thing that has happened in the past is if you're a person that runs an opera company, you are just hanging on by the skin of your teeth every day trying to make it happen. Because, people, I think, are starting to know, who follow these things like these, like your series, that making an opera is incredibly insane. Like there are so many things that go into it. And so normally, like, it's very hard to innovate in the opera world because you are planning 3 years ahead, and like you have to decide what it's going to be, and there's so many factors. So I think that now we have this little pause, not little, it's huge pause. But as much as it's hard for all of us and really painful, I think it's this moment where we should, what we're all doing, or what a lot of us are doing, take the opportunity to find out what else we can make. And I just really, I encourage everybody to do that. I think it's
right. And some of the things we are doing are things we knew we would have to do in 5-10 years, and they are just accelerated. And other things, it's reformulating, rethinking who we are, what our vision is, what our answer is to chronic, essential structural problem of our art now. So this crisis might have something good. On a personal level, so you were more with your family than you usually are because of the pandemic. How did you leave the last months? I mean, you were just so busy with your projects, or did you have some of this downtime that we all have to?
It's been very strange. I think a lot of, I heard somebody say, like, the only thing that is the same for everybody during this pandemic is that everything's different, but everybody's experience has been very different too. We were at home for those first few months, but I was making things right away. And I've talked to some people about this, but there was a lot of pushback kind of in our community on like doing too much, online stuff right away, because it's sort of seen like desperation.
You're perverting what we do. You're selling yourself short. You are encouraging an industry that doesn't remunerate you.
Yeah, and I hear that, and I think everyone's welcome to their opinion. I just don't have that opinion, and I didn't. And so basically, I haven't slowed down since since March.
And you've been more with your family than ever, because
I have, it's interesting. Not everyone knows this, but we homeschooled our children for a long time and traveled all together. So for many, many years, my wife and I and our 2 kids.
How old are they now?
Now, let's see. Lewis just turned 11 and Emma is about to turn 15.
Mm-hmm.
So until the last school year, we traveled together all the time. So and then this last year we had more time apart because they started school because they wanted to hang out with friends and things like that. So it hasn't been that different. But a lot of things have been different. I mean, obviously not some, there's been a little travel because I've done some of these film projects, but a lot less. I've been working with my wife, which is really fun, and we're a really good team. So that's been new and interesting. I think the stress of it is the same. If like what everybody's going through of like.
Well, I mean, the homeschooling, you were ready for it because that's what everybody has to do now.
Yeah.
But how can you homeschool you kids when you are singing, Dutchman? I mean, how you had a performance and the next morning you still have to have the same rhythm.
Yeah, I mean that's what I did for years. Like I always joke about, most singers the morning of a show are staying in bed late and not talking, and I'm like teaching algebra.
That work. I mean, that's what it is, and that's what you do, and so you go on stage.
I mean, human beings are pretty adaptable, and I think, maybe there's a universe in which if I hadn't done that, I would have been, more successful in some way as a singer. But I think
the other way around.
Yeah, well, that's what I say to a lot of people is that I think having my family as a huge part of my life has made me a more well-rounded person and therefore a more well-rounded artist.
But also, I have this fantasy that if you have to teach your kids, especially if they get older, I mean, you have to learn a few things that you're teaching them.
Oh, yeah. That's why they started going back to school, because I became out of my league very quickly, and Tanya too, my wife.
Right.
It gets really tricky, and it's a lot of time, and
because you have to prepare for the lesson you're going to give.
Yeah, and we've done different versions of it that are more or less structured. We're sort of hippies in some ways and sort of think of education as
how did your kids feel about it? Did they? I mean, that's all they knew. Did at one point, why did you do this to us? Or
oh yeah, especially if you have a teenager. I won't call her out too much here, but kids always
challenge.
I think kids are always challenging whatever you do as a parent. So I sort of take that with a grain of salt. But they loved it. I mean, when we were doing it, and they still that's a big part of who they are, is they've been all over the world. And they have friends all over the world. And, that's been a really, I think, overall very enriching experience for them.
I'm sure. And they probably learn more than other kids their age, maybe less, but they will catch up. And it has to be positive. Did you teach them music?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent. I mean, it's funny I think I'm the kind of person that it's hard. I'm used to being very, very critical about musical things. So I have to be careful when I'm teaching them. I mean, it's a good exercise really to go back to the beginning and just talk about like basic music theory.
Yeah.
But my, experience around music has made me feel like it's more, I don't know. I think music education is wonderful. I also think sometimes we as Westerners tend to think of everything in terms of achievement. And I think that sometimes I'm more encouraging of having like a healthy relationship with music rather than like having it always be a competitive thing, which in our business tends to be, a big part of it.
But to have a healthy relationship to a certain genre, you also need to learn the discipline of the genre.
Yeah, that's true.
And practicing can be painful, but music ultimately is about pleasure. It's about that finding that voice in yourself that's going to make you finally be able to see the world in another light, and a light that is truer and deeper. But that requires some effort too.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
But competition with yourself. So, and I know exactly where you are getting at. I mean, it's true that we have this Westerner and maybe because that's the theme now. This white privilege view on certain things.
Yeah.
But it's very hard when you apply this to music the way you and I do it at our level in our profession. We cannot give up those standards. And so that's that. Again, the competition should be with ourselves, but that is non-negotiable. You know,
yeah, I mean, I
and
think
it's at the service of self-torture and oppression of other people. No, 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 no. But if it's bringing everybody up, let's do it.
yeah, I mean, to me, it's more about if you've chosen classical music as your passion, whether that's professionally or not, for sure, you need to spend a lot of time perfecting that or practicing and getting.
Exploring. Yeah.
I think that often we assume that everyone who learns about music as a young person should take the track of a professional musician. And I think that it might be more healthy for human beings in society if we took more of a holistic approach to it. And especially what we think of as music education in this country tends to be classical music. And I think classical music is certainly a part of it. But
right.
I mean, there are all kinds of musical languages and cultures that are really fascinating and would be really great to learn about as young people. And I think the way we do it is wonderful and I love it. And I think that we have a tendency to think that it's the only and the best way.
And it can turn away people from the pleasure we are ultimately looking for in music. Yeah. And this, I 100% agree with you. And I can remember some teachers who almost disgusted me from music, you know, and so we don't want to do that. And not everybody has to be a professional.
I think in some ways it's much more difficult for instrumentalists than it is for singers, honestly, because it's very difficult to become a professional, you know, violinist, for example, if you didn't start at a very young age. And I think that's really hard because at that age, a child is not yet really in a position to make a choice about what their life is going to be. So in some ways it has to be made by a parent. And I'm not interested in judging parents for that, but I do think it's something interesting to think about. With singers, you know, you can actually we know so many singers that started, and I'm sort of one of them, started late. You know, you can become a singer in your 20s and still have a huge career.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Tricky.
Although you will see that most of even the instrumentalists, but the singers, obviously, who have a career, they have sung not professionally, but in a choir when they were kids. I think that's the base of so many profession, and that first connection to music is fundamental. And
I think that's a really important, you know, I think choir is God, this camera is driving me crazy today. I'm sorry. I think that doing it again. Community music making in general, in whatever form that takes, is something that really we need as a society. Like it's just such a different experience, you know, singing in a choir or playing in an orchestra. And of course there are versions of that are not classical music. I mean, people have been singing together and playing instruments together forever and in all different types of cultures. So I think that is for sure something that I would advocate for everyone to do. Then the fork in the road of whether or not you make it a discipline that becomes a profession or even an amateur who wants to be at a high level, you know, is always an interesting discussion of who you push that way and how that works. Yeah.
So you are at an age where careers start for a dramatic baritone. What do you see for yourself in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? As a singer, I suppose, but maybe something else too?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've made a habit of kind of not sticking to a box as a singer, and that's starting to be something just as an artist in general that
works.
Is of interest to me. You know, I think producing and directing these other things has really opened my eyes to the possibilities of what I could be doing. And I'm not going to stop singing, but I think that my life, you know, would be enriched by doing these other things too. So that's kind of going forward. My thinking is really as an artist trying to be authentic to myself, and if that is singing this particular role in this situation, that's what it is, and if it's making this film in this situation, that's what it is. I don't I spent a lot of time as a young singer trying to figure out who I am, and that was difficult, and I kind of did figure out who I am, and now the plan is just to stick to that as much as I can, and that really is a case by case basis, you know.
Right. Well, Ryan, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I hope we can argue about a piece together. And
I would love that.
I love that. I'm sure we'll have a lot of fun. And this is one of the joy of this little conversation I'm having. I can talk either to my colleagues I've worked a lot with and I never had the time to talk, or I can discover new colleagues who have such an amazing reputation at yours. And this was a lot of fun. Thank you very much. And I see
Thank you so much for having me. This was really a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Take care.
All right.